The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his rifle scope for the third time. His hands, usually steady as stone, trembled slightly as he peered through the lens at the distant compound. 3 months of surveillance had led to this moment, but something felt different today. The intel was solid, the target confirmed, yet his commanding officer's words echoed in his mind like a broken record. "Stand down, Rodriguez. You are not cleared to engage." Marcus had been a sniper for 8 years, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He had taken 43 confirmed kills, each one a necessary action in service of his country and his unit's safety. But today, for the first time in his career, he found himself questioning orders that made no tactical sense. The compound below housed a known terrorist cell that had been responsible for multiple attacks on civilian targets. Intelligence reports confirmed they were planning something big, something that would cost innocent lives. Yet here he was, watching through his scope, waiting for permission that might never come. Marcus shifted his position on the rocky outcrop, his ghillie suit blending perfectly with the desert terrain. His spotter, Sergeant Tommy Chen, lay beside him, equally frustrated by the situation. Tommy had been Marcus's partner for 2 years, and they had developed an almost telepathic understanding in the field. "This doesn't make sense, Marcus," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible even at close range. "We have clear shots on at least 4 high-value targets. Command knows what these guys are planning." Marcus nodded grimly, his eye never leaving the scope. Through the powerful lens, he could see men moving around the compound with purpose. They were loading vehicles, handling what appeared to be weapons crates, and displaying all the signs of an imminent operation. Every instinct he had developed as a soldier screamed that they needed to act now. "Orders are orders," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "But something's not right about this whole situation." The radio crackled softly in his ear, and Marcus heard the familiar voice of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, their commanding officer. "Overwatch, this is base command. Maintain position and observe only. Do not engage targets. Repeat, do not engage." Marcus pressed the radio button twice to acknowledge the order, a standard response that wouldn't give away their position with voice transmission. But inside, his frustration was building to dangerous levels. He had seen too much combat, lost too many friends, to sit idle when he could prevent future casualties. As the hours passed, the activity at the compound intensified. Marcus counted at least 12 armed men, several of whom matched photographs of known terrorists from their briefing materials. Through his scope, he watched them load what appeared to be explosive materials into 3 separate vehicles. The sight made his blood run cold. "Tommy, are you seeing this?" Marcus asked, though he knew his spotter was watching the same scene through his own binoculars. "Yeah, man, this is looking more and more like that bombing in Kandahar last year. Same MO. Same preparation patterns." Tommy's voice carried the weight of experience and the frustration of forced inaction. Marcus had been present at the aftermath of the Kandahar bombing. 37 civilians had died, including women and children who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The images from that day still haunted his dreams, and the thought that he might be watching similar preparations made his trigger finger itch with anticipation. The sun reached its peak, and the desert heat began to take its toll on both snipers. Sweat stung Marcus's eyes despite the bandana he wore beneath his helmet, but he maintained his position and focus. Professional discipline was everything in his line of work, even when that discipline conflicted with his moral instincts. Around midday, a new vehicle arrived at the compound. Marcus adjusted his scope to get a better look at the newcomers, and his heart nearly stopped. Stepping out of the passenger side was a man he recognized, though not from any intelligence briefing or wanted poster. This recognition was personal, visceral, and it changed everything. The man was tall, with a distinctive scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. He moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to command, and the other terrorists immediately deferred to his presence. Marcus had seen that scar before, had memorized every detail of that face during sleepless nights filled with rage and grief. "Tommy." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried an intensity that made his spotter turn immediately. "Do you see the tall guy who just got out of the white pickup?" Tommy adjusted his binoculars and focused on the target. "Yeah, I see him. Looks like he's in charge. Why? Do you recognize him from the briefings?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, transported back to a small town in Texas where his world had been shattered 3 years ago. His younger brother Danny had been working as a translator for a private security company when his convoy was attacked. Danny had survived the initial assault, but was captured by the attackers. 2 days later, his body was found with clear signs of torture. The man who had ordered Danny's torture and execution was standing in the compound below, very much alive and apparently still in the business of spreading terror and death. "His name is Khalil al-Rashid," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "He's the one who killed my brother." Tommy's head snapped toward Marcus, understanding immediately why this mission had just become infinitely more complicated. He knew about Danny's death, knew how it had affected Marcus, and knew that this changed the tactical situation in ways that went far beyond their current orders. "Marcus, you need to stay focused on the mission," Tommy said carefully. "I know this is personal, but we have orders." "Orders that don't make sense," Marcus replied, his eye returning to the scope. "Orders that are going to let these animals kill more innocent people." Through his rifle scope, Marcus watched as al-Rashid pointed toward different areas of the compound, clearly giving instructions for whatever operation they were planning. The man's casual demeanor, his obvious authority over the other terrorists, made Marcus's blood boil with remembered grief and present frustration. Danny had been only 24 when he died, fresh out of college with a degree in Middle Eastern studies and a desire to help rebuild war-torn communities. He had volunteered for the translator position because he believed in making a difference, in building bridges between cultures. His death had been brutal and unnecessary, a casualty of the kind of mindless violence that al-Rashid represented. Marcus had joined the military after Danny's death, driven by a need to fight back against the forces that had taken his brother. He had trained relentlessly, becoming one of the best snipers in his unit, and had always performed his duties with professional detachment. But now, with al-Rashid in his crosshairs, that detachment was crumbling. "Base Command, this is Overwatch." Marcus spoke into his radio, his voice carefully controlled. "We have positive identification on multiple high-value targets, including Khalil al-Rashid. Request permission to engage." The response was swift and uncompromising. "Negative, Overwatch. Stand down and maintain observation only. Higher command has political considerations that override tactical assessment." Political considerations. The phrase hit Marcus like a slap in the face. While politicians played their games and made their calculations, men like al-Rashid continued to operate freely, planning attacks that would claim innocent lives. The system that was supposed to protect people was protecting the very animals who preyed upon them. As the afternoon wore on, the activity at the compound reached fever pitch. The 3 vehicles were fully loaded, and Marcus could see the terrorists making final preparations for departure. Whatever they were planning, it was happening soon, and he was being ordered to let it happen. "They're getting ready to move," Tommy observed unnecessarily. "If they leave the compound, we'll lose our opportunity completely." Marcus knew his spotter was right. Once the terrorists departed, they would scatter and blend into the population, making them nearly impossible to track. The intelligence that had led them to this moment would be wasted, and al-Rashid would disappear back into the shadows from which he had emerged. The radio crackled again, and Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice filled their earpieces. Overwatch, be advised that drone surveillance will take over once targets leave the compound. Maintain your position until relieved. Drone surveillance. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. Drones could watch and record, but they couldn't prevent what was about to happen. They would have perfect footage of whatever atrocity al-Rashid was planning, footage that would be analyzed and filed away while families mourned their dead. Through his scope, Marcus watched as al-Rashid embraced several of the other terrorists in what appeared to be farewell gestures. The man's face was clearly visible, and Marcus could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the same ruthless intelligence that had made him such an effective terrorist leader. This was the man who had given the order to torture Danny. This was the man who had looked into his brother's eyes and decided that causing maximum suffering was worth more than whatever information Danny might have provided. This was the man who had turned Marcus's family's grief into a weapon of war. Marcus's finger moved to his rifle's safety, clicking it off with practiced precision. The movement was automatic, muscle memory from countless hours of training and combat experience. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like justice. "Marcus," Tommy's voice carried a note of warning. "You're not cleared to take the shot." "I know," Marcus replied, his crosshairs centered perfectly on al-Rashid's chest. "But sometimes being a soldier means doing what's right, not just what you're ordered to do." The compound below continued its frantic activity, unaware that 2 American snipers lay hidden in the rocks above, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. The desert wind picked up, requiring Marcus to make slight adjustments to account for the changing conditions. His training took over, calculating distance, wind speed, humidity, and a dozen other factors that would determine the accuracy of his shot. In his mind, Marcus could hear Danny's voice, remembered from their last phone conversation just days before his death. His brother had been excited about a school they were helping to rebuild, about the children who would soon have a safe place to learn and grow. Danny had believed in the possibility of peace, even in the midst of war. Now that same idealism seemed naive and dangerous. Peace could only exist when evil men like al-Rashid were removed from the equation permanently. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to eliminate those who preyed upon them. The first vehicle started its engine, black smoke puffing from its exhaust pipe. Time was running out, and Marcus knew that once these men left the compound, his opportunity for justice would disappear, possibly forever. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force, demanding a decision that would define not just the mission, but his entire future as a soldier. Through his scope, al-Rashid turned toward the rocky outcrop where Marcus lay hidden, almost as if he sensed the danger that lurked in the shadows. For a moment, their eyes seemed to meet across the impossible distance. Predator and prey locked in a dance as old as warfare itself. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, the familiar pressure building toward the breaking point. 3 pounds of pressure was all that separated al-Rashid from justice, all that stood between the past and the future, between orders and conscience. In that moment, Marcus understood that some decisions transcend military protocol and political calculations. The desert held its breath, waiting for the sound that would echo across the valley and change everything forever. The shot echoed across the desert valley like thunder, sharp and final. Marcus felt the familiar recoil of his rifle against his shoulder, but this time the sensation carried weight beyond mere physics. Through his scope, he watched al-Rashid collapse to the ground, a spreading pool of dark red staining the sand beneath him. The other terrorists scattered like startled birds, shouting and pointing in all directions, trying to locate the source of the shot that had just eliminated their leader. Jesus, Marcus, Tommy whispered, his voice mixing awe with concern. You actually did it. Marcus worked the bolt of his rifle with mechanical precision, chambering another round while keeping his scope trained on the compound. The professional part of his mind cataloged the chaos below, while another part of him felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, a sense of completion. Danny's death had finally been answered. The radio erupted in angry voices almost immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's tone was ice-cold and furious. Overwatch, report your status immediately. We show weapons fire from your position. Marcus knew there was no point in lying. The acoustic sensors around the base would have pinpointed his exact location within seconds of the shot. His military career was over, and depending on how the investigation went, he might be facing a court-martial or worse. Base Command, this is Overwatch. 1 target eliminated. Khalil al-Rashid is down. The silence that followed stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. When Harrison's voice returned, it carried the weight of command authority and barely controlled rage. Overwatch, you were explicitly ordered not to engage. Explain your actions immediately. Marcus watched through his scope as the remaining terrorists dragged al-Rashid's body toward one of the buildings. Even from this distance, he could tell the man was dead. The shot had been perfect, catching him center mass, just as he had turned toward their position. There would be no miraculous survival, no escape to fight another day. Target represented an immediate threat to civilian populations, Marcus replied, knowing the excuse was weak but needing to say something. Engaged under rules of engagement regarding imminent danger. Bullshit, Rodriguez, Harrison's voice crackled through the radio. You engaged a target for personal reasons, and you know it. Maintain your position. A retrieval team is en route to your location. Tommy looked at Marcus with concern. Both men knew that a retrieval team in this context meant military police, not extraction. Marcus had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now he would face the consequences. Below them, the compound had descended into organized chaos. The remaining terrorists were clearly trying to decide whether to continue with their planned operation or to abort and disperse. Marcus could see them arguing among themselves, their body language suggesting disagreement about how to proceed without their leader. Marcus, what's the plan here? Tommy asked quietly. The MPs will be here within an hour, and they're not going to be in an understanding mood. Marcus continued to watch the compound through his scope, his mind working through the implications of what he had just done. Killing al-Rashid had felt right in the moment, but now the practical realities of his action were beginning to sink in. He had disobeyed a direct order, eliminated a target without authorization, and potentially compromised whatever larger Operation Command had been planning. I don't know, Tommy, Marcus admitted. I just knew I couldn't watch that animal walk away again, not after what he did to Danny. The radio buzzed with increased chatter as news of the unauthorized shot spread through the command structure. Marcus could hear multiple voices discussing his position, his background, and the political ramifications of al-Rashid's death. Apparently, the terrorist leader had been under surveillance as part of a larger intelligence operation, and his elimination had just disrupted months of careful planning. Through his scope, Marcus noticed something that made him sit up straighter. One of the remaining terrorists was holding what appeared to be a cell phone, speaking urgently into it while pointing toward their position. The man's demeanor suggested he was calling for reinforcements or reporting the attack to higher command. Tommy, we might have a problem, Marcus said, adjusting his scope's focus. Looks like they're calling in support. We could have company soon. Tommy immediately shifted his binoculars to scan the surrounding area for signs of approaching vehicles or personnel. As a spotter, his job was to provide early warning of threats that Marcus might miss while focused through his rifle scope. I don't see anything yet, but you're right. That guy is definitely calling someone important. Tommy paused, then added, "Marcus, maybe this works in your favor. If hostile forces are converging on this position, your shot could be justified as necessary for mission security." It was a thin hope, but Marcus grasped it anyway. Military law provided some flexibility for soldiers who found themselves in rapidly evolving tactical situations, even when those situations resulted from their own actions. If he could demonstrate that al-Rashid's elimination had prevented a larger threat to their position, it might mitigate some of the consequences he was facing. The sound of approaching helicopters reached them before the aircraft became visible. Marcus felt his stomach drop, knowing that his time as a free soldier was rapidly coming to an end. The helicopters would bring military police, investigators, and probably a very angry commanding officer who would have to explain to his superiors why one of his snipers had gone rogue. "Base Command, this is Overwatch." Marcus spoke into his radio one final time as the lead helicopter crested the ridge behind them. "Be advised, hostile forces may be converging on our position. Recommend immediate extraction." Harrison's response was clipped and professional. "Overwatch, maintain your position and surrender your weapons to the MPs upon their arrival. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." Marcus looked at his rifle, the weapon that had been his constant companion through multiple deployments and countless missions. He had always taken pride in its maintenance and accuracy, treating it with the respect due a tool that had saved his life and the lives of his fellow soldiers many times over. Now it felt like evidence of his crime. The helicopter touched down 50 meters from their position, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris that temporarily obscured their view of the compound below. Marcus watched through narrowed eyes as 6 military policemen emerged from the aircraft, their weapons drawn but not pointed directly at him. Professional courtesy extended even to soldiers under arrest, at least initially. "Sergeant Rodriguez," the lead MP called out, his voice carrying clearly across the rocky terrain. "You need to set down your weapon and move away from your position with your hands visible." Marcus looked at Tommy one last time, seeing understanding and sympathy in his spotter's eyes. Tommy had been a good partner, and Marcus knew his actions would probably end their working relationship permanently. The military didn't take kindly to soldiers who couldn't follow orders, regardless of their personal motivations. "For what it's worth," Tommy said quietly, "I understand why you did it." "Danny was a good man who didn't deserve what happened to him." Marcus nodded, setting his rifle down carefully and beginning to stand with his hands raised. As he moved away from his shooting position, he caught one final glimpse through the scope that Tommy was now manning. The compound below was already beginning to disperse, the remaining terrorists loading into vehicles and preparing to scatter. The lead MP was a sergeant first class named Williams, a career soldier with the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple deployments and hard-won experience. He approached Marcus with professional caution, neither hostile nor friendly, simply doing his job. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you're under arrest for disobeying a direct order and engaging targets without authorization," Williams said, producing plastic zip-tie restraints. "You have the right to remain silent and to request legal counsel. Do you understand these rights?" "I understand," Marcus replied, allowing Williams to secure his hands behind his back. The restraints were tight, but not painful, applied with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. As Williams led Marcus toward the helicopter, the radio crackled with urgent chatter from the compound area. Apparently, the remaining terrorists were indeed calling in reinforcements, and drone surveillance was tracking multiple vehicles converging on the area. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that his unauthorized shot might have disrupted a larger terrorist operation, even if the disruption was unintentional. The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in tense silence, with Marcus flanked by 2 MPs, while Williams sat across from him with his sidearm drawn, but lowered. Through the aircraft's windows, Marcus could see the desert landscape rushing past, the same terrain where he had spent countless hours in training and actual operations. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was waiting when the helicopter landed at the base. His expression was thunderous, and Marcus could see other senior officers standing nearby, their faces reflecting various degrees of anger, disappointment, and professional concern. This incident would have repercussions that extended far beyond Marcus's personal fate. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Harrison said as Marcus was escorted from the helicopter, "you've created a shitstorm that's going to take months to clean up. I hope whatever personal satisfaction you got from that shot was worth destroying your career and potentially compromising ongoing operations." Marcus met his commanding officer's gaze steadily. "Sir, Khalil al-Rashid was responsible for the torture and murder of American personnel, including my brother. Given the opportunity to eliminate him, I took action that I believed was necessary for justice." "Justice?" Harrison's voice rose slightly. "You're a soldier, Rodriguez, not a judge and jury. We don't get to decide who lives and dies based on personal vendettas. That's what separates us from the terrorists we're fighting." The rebuke stung because Marcus knew it contained truth. Military discipline existed for reasons that went beyond simple obedience. And his actions had violated principles that were fundamental to professional soldiering. But as he was led away toward the detention facility, he found that he still didn't regret pulling that trigger. The detention facility was a small building designed to hold soldiers awaiting court-martial or other disciplinary proceedings. Marcus's cell was sparse but clean, containing only a narrow bed, a small table, and basic sanitation facilities. The walls were painted institutional green, and the single window looked out onto the base motor pool where he could see mechanics working on various vehicles. Hours passed before anyone came to speak with him. During that time, Marcus found himself replaying the events of the day over and over, analyzing his actions and their consequences. He had achieved his personal goal of eliminating the man responsible for Danny's death, but at a cost that was still being calculated. When the door finally opened, Marcus was surprised to see Captain Sarah Mitchell, the base's legal officer, rather than another MP or investigator. Mitchell was known for her fairness and intelligence, qualities that had earned her respect throughout the base despite her relatively junior rank. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, taking the chair across from him at the small table. "I'm here to discuss your legal situation and the charges you're likely to face." Marcus straightened in his chair, giving Mitchell his full attention. Military justice moved quickly when it wanted to, and he suspected his case would be expedited given the political sensitivities involved. "Ma'am, I understand the seriousness of my actions," Marcus said. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences command deems appropriate." Mitchell studied him for a moment before speaking. "The situation is more complicated than you might realize, Sergeant. While your unauthorized shot clearly violated direct orders, subsequent intelligence has revealed that al-Rashid was planning an imminent attack on a civilian target. Your action may have prevented significant casualties." This was news to Marcus, though it didn't surprise him. Al-Rashid had been in the business of killing innocents for years, and the activity at the compound had clearly indicated operational preparations. What surprised him was that this information might actually work in his favor legally. "However," Mitchell continued, "the method of your action and your clear personal motivation complicate any potential defense. The Uniform Code of Military Justice doesn't provide exceptions for personal vendettas, regardless of their justification." Marcus nodded, understanding the legal complexities his case represented. Military law was designed to maintain order and discipline, not to accommodate individual concepts of justice. His case would force the system to balance competing principles in ways that might set precedents for future situations. Outside his window, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Marcus watched the changing colors and thought about Danny, about al-Rashid, and about the shot that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring formal charges, investigations, and the beginning of a legal process that would determine his future. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Rodriguez slept without nightmares about his brother's death. Justice, however complicated its consequences, had finally been served. The courtroom was filled with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned, presenting the image of a decorated soldier who had served his country with distinction for 8 years. To his right sat Captain Mitchell, who had agreed to serve as his defense counsel despite the challenging nature of his case. Across the aisle, Major Patricia Hawkins represented the prosecution. She was known throughout the military justice system as a thorough and relentless advocate for military discipline, someone who believed that order and obedience were the foundation of effective military service. Her opening statement had been clinical and devastating, outlining Marcus's clear violation of direct orders and the potential consequences of allowing personal motivations to override military command. The members of the court-martial panel sat in judgment, 5 senior officers whose combined experience spanned decades of military service. They had seen soldiers crack under pressure before, had dealt with cases where personal trauma led to professional misconduct, but few cases carried the moral complexities that surrounded Marcus's actions. Colonel James Patterson, the presiding officer, called the court to order as Captain Mitchell prepared to present Marcus's defense. The legal strategy they had developed over the past 3 months walked a careful line between acknowledging wrongdoing and providing context that might mitigate the charges he faced. "Members of the panel," Mitchell began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "this case forces us to examine the intersection of military discipline and moral responsibility. Sergeant Rodriguez stands before you not as a rogue soldier motivated by bloodlust, but as a professional who faced an impossible choice between following orders and preventing imminent harm to innocent civilians." Mitchell approached the evidence table where enlarged photographs from the surveillance operation were displayed. The images showed the terrorist compound, the weapons preparations, and multiple shots of Khalil al-Rashid directing the activities that intelligence analysts had later confirmed were preparations for a bombing attack on a civilian market. "The prosecution would have you believe that Sergeant Rodriguez acted purely from personal vengeance," Mitchell continued. "While we acknowledge that the death of his brother influenced his emotional state, the evidence clearly shows that his target represented an immediate threat to civilian populations that command personnel were aware of but chose not to address for political reasons." Major Hawkins rose to object, but Colonel Patterson waved her down. This was a military court-martial, not a civilian trial, and the rules of evidence provided more flexibility for presenting contextual information that might be relevant to the charges. Marcus watched as Mitchell presented communications intercepts that had been declassified for the trial. The intercepted phone calls revealed that al-Rashid's cell had been planning to detonate truck bombs at 3 separate markets in a nearby city, timing the attacks to coincide with the weekly market days when civilian casualties would be maximized. Intelligence estimates suggested that the planned attacks would have killed between 100 and 200 civilians, primarily women and children shopping for food and household necessities, Mitchell explained to the panel. Sergeant Rodriguez's unauthorized action eliminated the operational leader of this cell and disrupted the attack timeline, likely saving those lives. Tommy Chen took the witness stand as the first defense witness, his testimony providing crucial context about the tactical situation they had faced during the surveillance mission. As Marcus's spotter, Tommy had observed the same suspicious activities that had convinced Marcus that immediate action was necessary. The compound was clearly in final preparation stages for a major operation, Tommy testified under oath. We observed weapons loading, explosive material handling, and coordination activities consistent with imminent terrorist attacks. In my professional opinion, waiting for higher authorization would have resulted in the loss of the opportunity to prevent civilian casualties. Under cross-examination, Major Hawkins pressed Tommy about the specific orders they had received and whether there had been any ambiguity about their mission parameters. Tommy's answers were honest but supportive, acknowledging that they had been explicitly ordered not to engage, while maintaining that the tactical situation had evolved beyond the original mission scope. "Sergeant Chen," Hawkins asked, "did Sergeant Rodriguez at any time express to you his personal desire for revenge against Khalil al-Rashid?" Tommy looked directly at Marcus before answering. "Ma'am, Sergeant Rodriguez identified al-Rashid as the individual responsible for his brother's death. However, his decision to engage appeared to be based on the immediate tactical situation rather than personal motivation." The answer was carefully worded but truthful, reflecting the complexity of Marcus's motivations during those crucial moments before he took the shot. Tommy's loyalty to his partner was evident, but so was his commitment to honesty under oath. The prosecution's case centered on military discipline and the absolute necessity of following orders in combat situations. Major Hawkins called Lieutenant Colonel Harrison as her primary witness, and his testimony was damaging to Marcus's defense. "Sergeant Rodriguez was explicitly and repeatedly ordered not to engage targets at the compound," Harrison testified. "These orders came from the highest levels of command and were based on intelligence considerations that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. His decision to ignore those orders and take unauthorized action compromised ongoing operations and potentially endangered other American personnel in the region." Harrison's testimony revealed that al-Rashid had been under surveillance as part of a larger intelligence operation designed to map the entire terrorist network he controlled. His death had severed connections that intelligence analysts had been developing for months, connections that might have led to the capture or elimination of dozens of other terrorists. "The bigger picture," Harrison explained, "was that al-Rashid alive and under surveillance was worth more to our overall mission than al-Rashid dead. His elimination provided immediate satisfaction, but reduced our long-term capability to combat the terrorist threat he represented." Captain Mitchell's cross-examination focused on the moral implications of allowing known terrorists to continue operating while intelligence agencies played their long games. She pressed Harrison about whether command had considered the civilian lives that might be lost while they pursued their broader objectives. "Colonel Harrison," Mitchell asked, "were you aware that al-Rashid's cell was planning imminent attacks on civilian targets?" "We had intelligence suggesting possible future operations," Harrison replied carefully, "but we had no specific intelligence about timing or targets that would have justified immediate action." "Colonel, with respect, we have communications intercepts that indicate otherwise. Did command choose to prioritize intelligence gathering over preventing civilian casualties?" Harrison's pause before answering spoke volumes about the ethical dilemmas that military commanders faced in counterterrorism operations. The balance between immediate action and strategic patience was one that had no easy answers, particularly when innocent lives hung in the balance. The most compelling witness for the defense was Danny Rodriguez himself, though he testified only through video recordings and written communications that were submitted as evidence. Marcus had to leave the courtroom when Mitchell played recordings of phone calls between the brothers, unable to hear Danny's voice without breaking down completely. The recordings revealed Danny's idealism and his commitment to helping rebuild communities torn apart by war. They also provided context for the devastating impact his death had on Marcus, transforming a professional soldier into someone driven by both duty and the need for justice. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a military psychologist, testified about the psychological effects of losing a family member to terrorist violence. Her expert opinion provided framework for understanding how Marcus's emotional state might have affected his decision-making without excusing his violation of orders. Sergeant Rodriguez presents a classic case of complicated grief combined with moral injury, Dr. Warren explained to the panel. The death of his brother in such circumstances created psychological pressures that military training doesn't adequately address. His actions, while clearly inappropriate from a disciplinary standpoint, are consistent with someone struggling to reconcile personal loss with professional responsibility. The prosecution objected to this line of testimony as irrelevant to the question of whether Marcus had violated direct orders, but Colonel Patterson allowed it to continue as relevant to potential mitigation of penalties. Marcus himself took the stand on the final day of testimony, knowing that his own words would likely determine his fate. Captain Mitchell had prepared him extensively for both direct examination and cross-examination, but they both knew that his testimony would be crucial to the panel's decision. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Mitchell began, "please tell the court about your decision to take the shot that eliminated Khalil al-Rashid." Marcus had rehearsed this moment countless times, but sitting in the witness chair with 5 senior officers staring at him still felt surreal. He spoke clearly and honestly about the tactical situation, his recognition of al-Rashid, and the factors that influenced his decision to engage without authorization. "I knew I was violating direct orders," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But I also knew that al-Rashid represented an immediate threat to civilian populations, and that this might be our only opportunity to eliminate him. As a soldier, I'm trained to protect innocent lives, and I believed that taking action was more important than following orders that would result in civilian casualties." Major Hawkins's cross-examination was aggressive but professional, focusing on Marcus's admission that personal motivation had played a role in his decision. She pressed him about whether he would have taken the same action if al-Rashid had not been responsible for his brother's death. "Sergeant Rodriguez, be honest with this court. Did you shoot Khalil al-Rashid to prevent civilian casualties or to avenge your brother's death?" Marcus met her gaze directly before answering. "Ma'am, both motivations were present. I won't pretend that seeing my brother's killer didn't influence my emotional state. But the tactical situation was real. The threat to civilian populations was real, and my training told me that immediate action was necessary regardless of my personal feelings." The honesty of his answer seemed to catch Hawkins off guard, and she shifted to questions about military discipline and the importance of following orders, even when soldiers disagreed with them. Marcus acknowledged the validity of these principles while maintaining that some situations transcended normal command structures. "Major, I understand that military discipline requires obedience to lawful orders," Marcus said, "but I also understand that soldiers have moral responsibilities that sometimes conflict with those orders. In this case, I chose to prioritize the protection of innocent civilians over compliance with orders that I believed were morally wrong." The closing arguments took place on a Friday afternoon, with both attorneys summarizing their positions for the panel that would decide Marcus's fate. Major Hawkins emphasized the critical importance of military discipline and the dangerous precedent that would be set if soldiers were allowed to substitute their personal judgment for command decisions. Captain Mitchell focused on the moral complexities of modern warfare and the impossible situations that soldiers sometimes faced when following orders meant allowing preventable harm to occur. She asked the panel to consider not just the technical violation of orders, but the broader context of Marcus's actions and their ultimate consequences. The panel deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict. Marcus stood at attention as Colonel Patterson prepared to announce the decision that would determine his future as a soldier and as a free man. "Sergeant Rodriguez, this panel finds you guilty of disobeying direct orders and engaging targets without authorization," Patterson announced. "However, we also find that your actions were motivated by legitimate tactical concerns and resulted in the prevention of civilian casualties. Therefore, this panel sentences you to reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of 6 months' pay, and administrative separation from the military with an honorable discharge. The sentence was far less severe than Marcus had expected. Administrative separation meant he would leave the military but retain his benefits and eligibility for veteran services. The honorable discharge classification meant that his service record would reflect his overall contributions rather than just his final transgression. As Marcus left the courtroom, he felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and closure. His military career was over, but he had avoided prison and retained his honor as a soldier. More importantly, al-Rashid was dead, and the planned attacks on civilian targets had been prevented. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a cemetery in Texas, placing fresh flowers on Danny's grave. The headstone was simple granite with his brother's name, dates, and the inscription, "He believed in peace." Marcus touched the cold stone and spoke quietly to his brother's memory. "It's finished, Danny. The man who killed you is gone, and I've found some peace with what happened. I know you wouldn't have wanted me to seek revenge, but I hope you understand why I had to." The desert wind carried his words away as Marcus turned to leave the cemetery. He had a new job waiting, working with a veterans organization that helped former soldiers transition to civilian life. It wasn't the career he had planned, but it felt right for this new chapter of his life. As he drove away from the cemetery, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, the face looking back at him wasn't haunted by guilt or consumed by the need for vengeance. It was simply the face of a man who had paid a price for justice and found a way to move forward with his life. The road ahead stretched through the Texas landscape, leading toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Marcus Rodriguez had learned that some decisions transcend military protocol and political calculations, that sometimes being a good soldier means knowing when to stop being a soldier at all. He had found his own form of peace, built on the foundation of justice served and a brother's memory honored.